Thames Water is attempting to increase bills by up to 44% to help pay off its huge debts. The water firm aims to spend at least a further £1.1 billion more on environmental issues. The regulator, Ofwat, have dismissed the company's bill lift proposal, prompting shareholders at parent company Thames Water to withdraw proposed cash injection and focus on debt interest payments. Joining me to discuss this is water expert Nick Higham. Good afternoon, Nick. For those viewers who haven't been following this story that much, what exactly is going on? How have we got into this situation?
What's going on is that Thames Water, which is the biggest water company in Britain, is at risk of going bust. They have borrowed far too much money, and when interest rates went up, they found they couldn't repay a lot of that money. They defaulted already this month on one loan of £190 million, which they were supposed to pay back. They've also got huge problems with leaks from mains and in particular overflows from sewage plants, which are a result of the fact that in the past 20 odd years, they've not invested as much money as they should have done in upgrading all their infrastructure, all those pipes and pumps and all the rest of it. And the reason they didn't do that was partly because the shareholders took far too much money out in dividends and the regulator didn't step in and say, hang on a minute, you can't do that. You should be spending this money on services to the consumer instead. So Thames is in a really bad way. And one of the most recent developments is that its shareholders have said, we're not going to put in any more money. Now, that's important because Thames and indeed other water companies in Britain really need more money to spend to upgrade all the sewage works and all the rest of it. And we're in a really rather dangerous position now as regards Thames, because the shareholders won't put any more money in. It's unlikely that the banks are going to lend much more if they're defaulting on their debts. They need to spend more money. The only place they think they can get it is us, the consumers. And so we're being told that over the next 5 years, as you said, water bills are likely to go up for Thames customers by 44% or even more in real terms once you take into account inflation. And that's not just Thames, that's across the board. That's other water companies as well.
So essentially, we are going to be paying ridiculous amounts for our water because of these water companies and their greed. Their shareholders have been paying themselves lots of money, which they shouldn't have been doing, and now we're going to have to foot the bill.
Yes, I mean, the shareholders would say we shouldn't have been doing it. No, we're perfectly legitimate. The profits were there. We just took them. I think the organisation that's at fault here more than any is the regulator, Ofwat, which should have stepped in at an earlier stage and said this money needs to stay in the water industry. But the only real alternative to us stumping up more money to pay for the necessary improvements is to get the government to do it. And one reason why we have a privatised water industry in this country in the first place is that back in the 1970s and 1980s, when there was an equally significant need for really major investment in the water companies, the government of the day said, we're not going to fund that. We're not going to pay for all of that. Let's privatise these companies and get the private sector. Let's get shareholders and banks to come up with that money instead. That worked for about 10 years. It was quite effective, actually. A lot of new money, a lot of new investment came into the water industry. Then the shareholders discovered they could effectively game the system and take all this money out. So it's not working now. Interesting question. Will the government today be prepared, or will it have to step in? It is theoretically impossible for a water company to go bust for obvious reasons. We need the water. So there's a special administrative regime, it's called, which applies if a water company can't meet its debts. That's effectively temporary nationalisation. Well, this government doesn't like nationalised industries. It's not happy about taking things like water companies or trade companies or anything else onto the public's books, but it may be left with no alternative.
So of the 11 water companies that provide water and sewage services in this country, 6 are owned by foreign companies, or in some cases countries, and they've loaded up the companies here with debts. Now, you're saying they can't go bust, but if it gets to a point where they say, well, actually, we can't fix any of these pipes now, we can't put any more money in, well, then what's going to happen? They can't go bust, but also they can't provide us with clean water, and they're going to keep on dumping water in our rivers and canals.
Well, what will happen in the case of Thames, most probably, is that it won't go bust, but it will go into this special administrative regime, and the shareholders, the current shareholders, will lose their investment. Their shares will be worth nothing or next to nothing. Now, that may seem like a just outcome, given that it was the shareholders who took too much money out in the first place. The unfortunate thing is that most of Thames's shareholders now are not the people who took all the money out several years ago. Current Thames shareholders haven't paid themselves a dividend for 7 years. And if they lose their shirts, obviously they're going to be very unhappy. And some of them are, yes, sovereign wealth funds, Abu Dhabi, China. A lot of them are pension funds. They've got pensioners' savings there, and they're depending on their investments in things like Thames Water to generate an income which will enable them to pay pensions in future. So they're not going to be very happy. And the other problem is that if Thames shareholders lose their shirts, who else is going to want to invest in the water industry? Because, don't look like such a safe investment after all. And for an industry, as I say, that really desperately needs additional money, extra investment, if you have shareholders or potential shareholders around the world saying, you know what, we're not going to put money into water in Britain, that's really bad news.
Now, Ofwat, the regulator, they are clearly at fault here. They took their eye off the ball completely, and it now feels a little bit like it's too little too late with them. How can we make sure that they're punished and they don't continue to let these water companies get away with murder?
Well, that's really down to the government, which has to lean on Ofwat and make it clear what Ofwat's expected to do. I mean, Ofwat currently, leave aside what happened in the past, Ofwat currently is in a very difficult position because it is supposed to keep prices for the consumer as low as possible. That's obviously good. It's supposed to encourage as much investment as possible. That's obviously good. And it's supposed to make sure that water companies in Britain are still an attractive investment so that future shareholders will be prepared to put their money in. That's the bit that Ofwat is in danger of dropping the ball on because of the situation we're in. I think in the long term, we need to look at the whole system of regulation. We need to ask if it's working. In the long term, we certainly need to have a discussion about whether water in Britain would be better off under public ownership. It is. Most other countries around the world, most big cities are supplied with water and sewerage by publicly owned organisations, by the state, by the local authority. That used to be the case in Britain until everything was privatised in 1989. We do need to have a look at that again, even if, as I said earlier, this government and indeed a future Labour government is probably going to be really, really reluctant to bankroll this huge necessary investment in water, this money that's got to come in. But I think the system has not worked. It has been, we now realise, a catastrophe 30 years on, whatever it is, 35 years on, and we need to think again.
OK, Nick, thank you very much for your time, mate.